Live service games. A phrase that will make even the most hardened gamers shiver in their boots. What was once a means to keep a game's longevity several times what it would be in the past, now serves as a means to bleed the consumer dry with endless skins, content, and events. It seems that almost every game company for the past decade has wanted a piece of the pie, all with varying degrees of success. I don't mean to sound so pessimistic about it. Some of the most fun I've had come from live service games, Destiny 2, Overwatch, and the topic of today's video, Dead by Daylight. What a unique game on the market, Dead by Daylight. And by that, I mean good luck trying to play another game like it. Several companies and franchises have tried and failed to create their own asymmetrical PvP games, and yet all ventures lead to eventual failure. Some of the earliest adopters of the genre, Evolve and Friday the 13th the game, all went belly up for their own reasons. And now some newer examples, Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Killer Clowns from Outer Space, just can't hold a candle to Dead by Daylight. Truthfully, why DBD has succeeded isn't exactly what this video is about. The point I'm trying to make is this. Despite their success, the developers' behavior have not been one to rest on their laurels, with 2024 being one of the busiest years for the game. Alan Wake, Dungeons & Dragons, Tomb Raider, Castlevania, and 2 original expansions, one of which had a character whom quickly became one of the most popular survivors in the game. That, and with Five Nights at Freddy's just on the horizon, it's clear that the devs have no intentions of slowing down. But let's go back a year or two, to March of 2023, which introduced a brand new killer and 2 new survivors. The survivors aren't anything to write home about. All survivors play the same, and the perks they brought, with background player as an exception, didn't exactly rock the boat. No, who I want to talk about today is who could very well be one of the worst content expansions a game could add, who, despite being the ship of Theseus of characters, still leaves a scar across all players who remember it. This is the Skull Merchant. All things considered, 2022 was a pretty slow year for Dead by Daylight. Consisting of only 4 chapters and no mid-chapters, one might be deceived into believing the game would be slowing down from now on. But no, in fact, this lull was merely a brief nap before Dead by Daylight would step up in their content expansions, releasing a brief teaser February 10th and showing the killer off officially with the release of the player test build 5 days later. Adriana Imai, a Japanese-Brazilian millionaire who was inspired by the dark manga created by her father. Now, I'm not going to nitpick her lore, cause boy howdy does the Skull Merchant have shooters, and truthfully, her lore isn't nearly as silly as it seems. But you understand, for an average consumer of Dead by Daylight, the term dark Brazilian manga sounds completely ridiculous. Let's talk about her powers. Why she's hated so much. The Skull Merchant in the beginning had 4 drones to place around the map. These drones, while active, would reveal the location of survivors while progressively locking on to anyone inside its range, eventually marking them as exposed. Which, for those who aren't entirely familiar with Dead by Daylight, exposed is a status effect which means a killer can instantly knock down a survivor regardless of their health state. This power, while potent, isn't entirely good. Yeah, 4 areas are completely locked down, but there are more than 4 areas in a map. However, it didn't take long for people to discover what made the Skull Merchant terrifying. The Skull Merchant succeeded the most in never letting the game end. To win the match, survivors need to complete 5 generators around the map. In a map, there are 7 generators. This leaves the killer with much to manage, except for the Skull Merchant. Her drones didn't require her to actively do anything beyond placing them, or replacing them if ever they were sabotaged by a survivor. This means she could place her drones all around the last 3 generators and never let anyone touch them, since she would always know whenever a survivor entered her drone's area. This tactic was upsettingly consistent. Survivors had nothing at their disposal to get the last generator done, because if they stayed in the drone's area for too long, they'd just get detected. They couldn't sabotage the drone because then the killer would just return and replace it, and they couldn't lead the killer away because she had no reason to leave. When people discovered this, she quickly became the most annoying killer to deal with. This led to a lot of discourse among the community. And here, just now, rises our main character of this chapter of the story. The protagonist, but certainly not our hero, CM9I. CM9I wasn't even anyone in particular, just your average DBD fan. When the Skull Merchant released, he became very vocal about his undying support, streaming his content on Kick and getting to a heavy-handed argument to anyone who would hear him. It was him who coined the phrase, 3-gen Skull Merchant is like chess. Let's now talk about our deuteragonists. Team Eternal, Pedro, Dan, Zaka, and the team captain, Nightlight. A competitive team, Before you ask, yes, competitive Dead by Daylight is a thing. Yeah, it's a little silly, but it's also kind of cool. But Team Eternal is considered to be one of, if not the best competitive team. And Nightlight is considered one of, if not the best player. CM9I tweets what is probably the most obvious bait of all time, calling Nightlight a fraud, using a couple of his lost games as evidence, and challenging Eternal to a match. Nightlight, like a chump, takes the bait, gets a bit heated, and accepts CM9I's challenge. On July 21st, 2023, the Dead by Daylight community stood still to watch the scrim. The most infamous player versus the best team in the world. 54 minutes. He held the last generator for 54 minutes against the best team in Dead by Daylight. And he lost. This, believe it or not, was the last straw for Skull Merchant. It became clear to everyone involved, behavior included, that Skull Merchant could not continue the way she was, and the devs quickly stepped into action, giving her quite a hefty hit. The drones lost their active mode, leaving behind only her scouting mode, which always existed, it just wasn't relevant to the story. The scout mode is invisible until it scans a survivor, and if the survivor is scanned too much, they eventually become injured with a claw trap. To some, this was not enough. Even though she couldn't hold a 3-gen for as long as she did in the past, people didn't care. People wanted nothing to do with her. They hated everything about her power, despite her not being very powerful at all. They hated it so much that survivors didn't even want to play against her. If ever a survivor found themselves in a match against the Skull Merchant, a great number of players would disconnect or even kill themselves on the hook. This was such an epidemic that during a 1-month time frame, December 30th to January 29th, 2024, she held the highest kill rate across all killers at 70%. Behavior's ideal kill rate is 57. In October of that year, Skull Merchant received her final nail in the coffin, completely removing the invisibility of the drone scan lines and reducing the number of scan lines to 1 per drone. If you couldn't guess, this is terrible, and ranks her as the worst killer in all of Dead by Daylight. Behavior themselves have admitted that this turbo nerf is to completely eliminate all complaints levied against her until her eventual rework in a few months' time. This is no doubt the most nuclear option, second only to removing her from the game, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. A little over a month ago, the devs let the players peek behind the curtains to view what they have in store for the Skull Merchant. With more dynamic ideas on how her drones are to work, such as encouraging survivors to hack the drones, a special ability that can detect all survivors, and even the ability to crash your drones into survivors to hurt them. And not even a week ago, we got a much more refined preview, fleshing out the power by adding a companion drone similar to the dog a recent killer came with. These reworks still need some touching up, and if the concept art is anything to go off of, this rework is far from finished. We won't even see it before Five Nights at Freddy's. But I'm a hopeful guy, and to be honest, the only way is up for Skull Merchant. I'm placing my trust in behavior that this rework will finally heal the wound that was deeply cut by the chess merchant. Well, that's the end of my video. Thanks for dealing with my nonsense. I tried my best to make this video palatable for people who aren't really fans or don't know much about DBD, so I hope I succeeded. If you're interested in anything else I make, I do stream occasionally at twitch.tv/chad2_, and I have a Twitter with the same handle, just without the S at the end. Until then, I hope your games go good. See you next time. Releasing a brief teaser February 10th and showing the killer off officially with the release of the player test build 5 years later. Fuck! I said years.